So you know that Viral Harry Styles cardigan? And I know I'm massively late to the party here, but as my interest is mostly vintage knitwear, I'll be the first to admit I haven't exactly got my finger on the pulse of knitwear trends. But even I have realised that this patchwork cardigan has started a wider craze for patchwork knitting and crochet patterns generally. And I've been thinking to myself as I see more and more of these, where have I seen this before? And the answer is, of course, the 1940s. So as somebody who was generally decades behind the trends anyway, I thought, why not make the 1940s version of this patchwork sweater craze? So some of these you may recognise from my 3-ply yarns video, like the Lang Yarns Jawoll. This is KnitPicks Palette. These two are Cascades, fingering 220. This one was from one of my Home Fires jumpers. These are the oddments from my chevron jumper. I do have a little bit of the Schachenmayr left, but I don't know whether it'll be enough for this. And then this is CaMaRose Sommeruld, which I use for my rainbow jumper and for those 1940s socks. And I've got a little bit more of this left as well. Let's have a look and see what the pattern says, because this pattern is free online. It's made available by 1940s Style for You. And it's specifically, you can say, made in odd shades of wool, save coupons, and it gives instructions for using unpicked wool as well. So it's a proper make do amend 1940s era pattern. So 6 ounces of unpicked wool, 2, 3 or 4 ply in assorted colours. So let's put my scales on ounces because I cannot be bothering with the conversions. And let's see if we have 6 ounces all in here. Oh yeah, more than enough. Okay. And then what does it say? 3.5 ounces for the yoke, sleeves and side panels. So I doubt I've got enough of that. No, 1 5/8, 1 1/4, 1 1/4. Ah, okay. Any number of colours can be used in the check pattern, but for a good effect, it is advisable to repeat one of these colours for the yoke, sleeves and side panels, although these need not necessarily be all in the same colour. Okay, so I think we're going to be making it, it's going to be really patchwork. So maybe if I need an ounce, 3.5 ounces for the yoke and the sleeves, maybe we're going to have to stripe these 3. Probably going to have the most of those. So we'll have 4 1/4 of those, so we should have enough. Really, it'd be nice to use the darker colours, I think, but I've only got 2 5/8. Oh, okay, it's going to be tight. Well, we'll figure it out. It's going to be an adventure. Okay, so I have my pattern. I'll be honest with you, I've already done my first strip because I have learned from nearly 3 years experience on YouTube now. Never film the first attempt, never goes well. So the way this pattern is constructed is it's made of strips like this that are then sewn together. So there's going to be a lot of sewing up, which we will cross at another time. But you start, I think what differentiates this design from other patchwork sweaters I've seen, and actually I think this makes this one a bit more interesting, is the fact that you're not just patchworking the colours, but you're alternating between this lace pattern and this moss stitch pattern. So this first strip starts with the lace pattern, so the second strip is going to start with the moss stitch pattern. And you can see how the tension kind of differs. Maybe it's better with the light coloured ones, you can see it. The moss stitch is definitely narrower than the lace pattern. So that's another benefit of offsetting them, is that if it's a little short, it won't matter because it will be filled in by the slightly wider one next to it. It has a suggestion for the order of colours, but I actually have more colours than the original design. So what I think I'm going to do is sort of similar to theirs. I'm just going to offset by 2 squares. So I'm going to start with this colour. Got it here all ready to go. And then we just cast on 18. And I'm doing the knitting on, cast on method, as I often do for vintage things because it's the one that was most common in the UK at the time. 18 stitches. And this is the only time I knit English style, is when I'm casting on. Weird, I know. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. Lovely. And then it's knit one, purl 1 rib for 2 1/4 inches. No, not rib, moss stitch. So knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1. And these are number 9 needles, so it's quite a loose gauge for a 3-ply weight yarn. It's 3.75 mil, so it grows pretty quickly. With the first moss stitch square complete, I tied on my next colour to start the lace section. I had to double check the pattern to make sure I had the lace repeat memorised correctly because you know my memory is not the most reliable, but it was quite a simple pattern and every row was the same, so that made it easier to get to grips with quickly. And then after the lace section, it was time for the next colour and another moss stitch square. And then back to the lace pattern in the next colour, and then repeat this process for what seems like forever until you eventually have 5 strips for the front and the back. Hello. So, this economy jumper, I have finally finished knitting all my little strips. God, that got boring really quickly. I mean, just knitting like 18 stitches like this wide. Oh God, that was dull. So I have now entirely used up those 3 yarns from the chevron jumper, the Schachenmayr, the Cygnet and the West Yorkshire spinners, to the extent that I actually even had to get, you can see in this panel here, I've had to go for a different sort of orange. This was the other main colour in that jumper, which is a Cascades one as well. So I even ran out to the extent that I've got a little stripe there. But I'm not too worried about that. It's all in the spirit of make, do and mend. I had so little of the Schachenmayr and the Cygnet left that I actually ended up undoing my swatch from that chevron jumper so that I could get at least one more square out of those 2 colours for the back, because I wasn't going to have any of that on the back and I just sort of wanted to tie it together a bit more with the front. So I don't know how that is going to figure out in my total for stash busting. I think I'll just leave it out because I was just going to keep that swatch anyway. The other thing I did to make it a little bit different on the back to the front was I started with a different colour. So on the back I've got, I can't remember which ones are the front and which are the back now. Oh, bloody hell. Interestingly, what that will mean with my colour stripes is that they're almost inverted like that. Sort of. Kind of. I don't know. I just thought it would make it a bit more interesting, but also it meant I varied which colours are repeated in each stripe. Do you know what I mean? So I sort of evenly distributed the usage of the colours. And I'm very glad I did that because firstly I have to sew all these up, which I'm not looking forward to. So I'm procrastinating doing it. What I want to do, I've just spent ages with the scales in the kitchen doing it the old-fashioned way, literally scribbling out on a piece of paper how many stitches, how many rows, to see approximately how much yarn I'm going to need for each section, because the sleeves, the side panel and the yoke on this jumper are all knit separately and sewn up. So originally I was hoping I could use these 3, but having used them in the main pattern as well, in the patchwork pattern, I don't now have enough of these 3 combined to get everything out. So I'm going to have to incorporate another yarn, and the only one I've really got left that will work is this Lang yarns. So I've just done a whole load of calculations. I won't bore you with the maths because like basically I worked out which one had the most stitches and I'm using the yarn that I've got the most of for that section. So basically the sleeves are the most yarn intensive. I have the most of this left, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pair it with this so that this is sort of like a cuff, and then this is the main body of the sleeve. We'll see. I did contemplate just doing a stripe pattern for all of it, but because it's all worked in moss stitch, stripes in moss stitch, because of the offset rib sort of knitting and purling, you don't get nice stripes, you get really bobbly sort of stripes. And I don't know how I feel about that. So I think I'm just kind of leaning into the patchwork nature of it, and we're just going to have colour blocked sections. If I have enough yarn for that, I don't know, because this is based on the pattern stating you need about 3 ounces of yarn, but goodness knows what their meterage was for the yarn they're suggesting. I don't know how they've worked that out, all that sort of thing. So it's all a bit of an experiment still. So I'm starting by casting on for the yoke pieces because that takes the fewest stitches and I have the least of this yarn. So I'm sort of doing this as a kind of test run to make sure I've done my maths right, and also to see how much of this I'll have left, if any, to maybe supplement the other sections where I don't really, where it's a bit closer, shall we say. So it's cast on 91 stitches for the yoke. Actually, as I'm sat here doing this, I got this far and then I realised I'm casting on 91 stitches and there are 90 stitches across the top edge of the panels. And it would actually be much neater and cleaner and probably easier if I sewed up the panels first and then picked up the stitches along the top. So I think that's what I'm going to do instead. Well, it's got to be done sometime. So like I say, from previous experience, I know, never film the first attempt. I was originally couldn't think how was best to do this because I have several dilemmas, I suppose, if you like, in terms of the construction of this. Firstly, you can see these panels, the lace panels, are much stretchier than the moss stitch panels, and so they distort a lot more. So I was nervous about stretching out this section as I stitched it, but also, of course, the tension is different, so I knit more rows for the moss stitch panels than I did the lace panels. So while they're the same length, I don't have the same number of rows to match them up evenly to do like a flat seam. So I had originally intended to put them right sides together and over sew the edge and just deal with it. And then I thought to myself, no, do you know what? Let's try doing a flat seam, see if I can't make it work. And I've gotten this far, and actually, I don't think it looks too bad. It's not perfect, but it does look continuous, and they've sort of like interlocked a little bit with the stitches. And I quite like the way that looks. I'm quite happy with that, and it's nice and strong and firm. So that's what we're going with. So I am using my cut threads to sew this up, just because I have so little, I don't have any yarn left for some of these, so I can't use anything else. And that way as well, I'm getting this sort of continuous effect. However, some of them are so short, it's very difficult to thread my tapestry needle. So let's demonstrate on this one how I'm doing this, because you'll be able to see the yellow. So like, have I got a smaller? Got one with a very small eye. Let's see if this will work. So I'm going through the purl bumps on the very edge. So really it looks like that one should go to that one. And I'm pulling it nice and tight and firm to sort of gather down. And I'm not too worried if it's not perfect, because it sort of adds to its rustic charm. Don't think I'm going to be able to get any more from that piece of thread, so I'll take it through to the back. And then let's use this one. So look, here you can see where it's crinkly. This was unpicked from the swatch. And then in the other way, so I try and catch this in the jog so it sort of definitely lines up. And then, because I'm sort of having to do this upside down. And then this is where I sort of have to decide how I'm going to sort of ease it in. Actually, looks like this one's worked out quite well. Yeah, brilliant. And then I just weave the ends in. I'm trying to not cut anything off, because these were so short to begin with and I've used them for sewing up, so I'm just weaving it in, just weaving in whatever I've got left. It's actually a perfectly acceptable seam on the wrong side too. Who needs intarsia? I mean, I might trim that end because it's gone a bit fluffy anyway. There we go. So I've only got about 100 more squares to do. Once all the strips were finally sewn together, which took a really long time, I watched the whole of Wednesday on Netflix, I picked up the stitches for the yoke along the top edge. I had to make sure I was doing this evenly, and it was tricky over some of the seams to tell where to pick up the stitch from, but eventually I got there and could work the moss stitch yoke, which was basically just a rectangle, up until the shoulder shaping. This was just casting off stitches at the beginning of each row in that very traditional vintage style. I could have done short row shaping, but I was going for accuracy to the pattern here. This section left me with only a few meters of this red yarn left, so I'm calling it all gone and used up for my stash busting. And then I had a rough few days and wasn't really up to filming much, so here I am silently showing you the side panels. I didn't quite have enough yarn to finish them off, so I ended up putting them on very differently sized stitch holders until I had finished the sleeves, in the hope that I would have a little bit of the blue yarn left to finish them. The sleeves I actually worked top down, which was very confusing with the way the pattern was written, and I didn't film them. I'm in the middle of making a corset, of course. These things are never straightforward. So, in terms of sewing up, it says to sew the side panels, to join the front and the back, join the side seams, apart from leaving an opening, and join the sleeve seams. But because of the shape of the sleeves, I'm a little unsure where do you think that it's the end of the sleeve seam? And that's just the sleeve head? It's quite a shallow sleeve head. I think let's try that and see what happens. You can see that I ran out of the green yarn about halfway through the sleeves, but I did have just enough of this blue to finish the side panels. Sewing up the panels was actually pretty straightforward compared to all those little strips, and I'd become quite practiced at joining moss stitch edges to get a flat seam by this point. For the little bit of light blue at the side panels, I was able to match it up with a colour change in the front and back panels, so it looked more like a continuation of the patchwork design, which was a happy little accident. It was weird to have two side seams to sew up. I tell you, so much sewing up on this project. I've chosen a seamless construction for my next project as a result. And then the sleeve seams, I actually sewed in using a whip stitch. It was the only method I tried where the stitches weren't visible from the right side. With all the colour changes, this green yarn really stood out, but the whip stitches were hardly visible. The last step was the shoulder seams, and like a lot of vintage designs, this pattern has you leave an opening and then install buttons or poppers to close the gap. I used little vintage poppers, or snaps, from my collection to try and make this as subtle as possible. And then after all the sewing up, this patchwork jumper was complete. As you can see, it turned out much too big. That might be cool for a modern, oversized patchwork design, but this 1940s style really needed to be more fitted. But apart from that, I think it's alright. This is me contemplating whether it would look better if I added shoulder pads, but I didn't have any in this room, so I just left it. This was definitely more of a process knit than a product knit. I learnt a lot and I'm pleased I tackled this design, but I don't think I'll be getting a lot of wear out of this one. It's just too big. I mean, see, look at that. It looks so much better with a bit of negative ease. I don't hate the overall effect, but I don't think I've quite captured the elegant style of the original design. What do you think? I put my hair up to see if it would make any difference, but I'm not sure it did. You'll be pleased to know though, if you've been following my stash busting, that this jumper used up 4.5 balls of wool. Yay! Thanks for watching. See you next time.